So this chapter asks the question, who is the audience for incremental code reform? And that will vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but there are some similarities that are uniform. And then additionally, you have to ask yourself, what is your audience capable of addressing when it comes to code reform? Lynn already mentioned that the keystone of the CNU Project for Code Reform is this quote from Rick Bernhardt, who was a planning director in Nashville, Tennessee. And he said, if you do nothing else, do this. And so as you begin to ask yourself, what do I really want to achieve? Ben Brown, who's a partner of mine at Placemakers, he likes to say, do the biggest little thing. And if you can do that, you'll have the greatest impact while not overextending the capacity of staff, your elected officials, and your development community. So really, who are the participants? And it's a pretty diverse group. I already mentioned the three, your elected officials, but that also includes appointed officials like planning boards or commissions, and then your staff, and not just planning staff, but across all departments that have input into zoning. And maybe the most important people that have the greatest vested interest are residents and businesses. So these are the people that actually own the property within the municipality. But that gets to another group that has a financial interest in zoning as well, and that's the development community, builders and developers. And then that whole development arm is also influenced by finance, who they have a lot to say about some aspects of zoning, like parking, for example. And then finally, state agencies that have to respond to your zoning needs. And in the case of any streetscape improvements, MDOT, if they have jurisdiction. So Lynn already mentioned the arc of engagement, and it's determining where on this arc you really are in your capacity. And if you can do that honestly and clearly with yourself, then your chance of implementation success is really much higher. And so that's what we'll be talking about in these next few slides, is how to really assess the capacity of your various audiences. So maybe the most important one is staff, and the primary question is, who's at the counter? Who has to make the decisions when the applicant walks in the door? And I remember in the very first meeting we had in Michigan, we met with many local government planning directors, and from towns and villages to cities. And there was one gentleman from a small city that he was the planning director, the director of economic development, the public works director, and the zoning administrator. So this one guy had to do with like 95% of the built environment for his jurisdiction. And it was really crucial to him in the preservation of his main street that we could give him tools that would be economically and from a time management perspective the most efficient to implement. And then in other larger jurisdictions where you have many departments and many individuals involved, they have various priorities. And so it's being able to assess what kind of coordination is required across department. The other thing to consider in this phase of assessment is, what is your planning commission's ability also, because most of those people are volunteers, whether it's a board or a commission. And so getting them up to speed when it's a volunteer activity for them anyway, having them involved from the beginning, helping them to be absolutely committed to the intent of the reform, and then having staff and the boards and commissions understand the priorities of the reform. So there will be trade-offs that have to be made in most applications. And to be able to clearly say that pedestrian priority is higher than vehicular priority when you are on our main street. To make judgments like that through the process that give everybody the tools that they need to make decisions, that's really crucial to success. Political will, this goes without saying, not only for the adoption of any code reform that's being proposed, but actually to the implementation as well, because they may wind up seeing appeals over the long term. And so building champions on your city council or county commission, that's really critical to the success of your reform. Then we get into the development community, and this can be really tricky because especially if you're making changes that affect their business models in any way, then it's a financial burden. And so a priority question is, how open are they to new ideas and to changing market preferences? Because we see more openness sometimes in the more urban environments and less so in smaller towns and more rural conditions. And so you have to be able to make code reform that fits the capacity of the people that are building it. And the other big question is, what is their current relationship with staff? Is it a partnership, and is it trusting, or is it adversarial? And that will affect the changes and the rate at which you choose to make changes. So in future chapters, we'll be looking at the areas of reform, and you'll notice that each of those are divided into basically easy, intermediate, and challenging or hard. And just be very aware that as you make decisions going through that process, that being really aware of your audience and what your audience can achieve will make all the difference in the success of your reform efforts.